All right, so welcome everyone to the Mobile CSP Hangout for February 14th. Happy Valentine's to all the lovers out there. We are here tonight. Welcome everyone to the Mobile CSP Hangout for February 14th. We have an echo, so we're just going to stop. So if anybody is watching in the Hangout, go ahead and mute the YouTube video. All right, so hopefully, sorry about that. Hopefully everybody is hearing us loud and clear. We are going to go ahead and get started. I am going to share my screen momentarily. And usually there's about a 20-second lag or so, so I'm just going to hold on for a second here until we are broadcasting. So again, welcome to the Mobile CSP webinar for February 14th. You are hearing Pauline Lake speaking, the Mobile CSP teaching consultant. We are here tonight to go over some pacing with everyone. There's been some concern and worry about making sure everyone's on track to complete all of the requirements before any due dates come. And we're going to talk about performance tasks, in particular Explore task, as well as talk about some exam review as we're getting closer to that May 5th exam date for the AP CSP exam. So I'm just going to go ahead. So linked under the video is the agenda with the slides if you would like to view those. Again, my name is Pauline Lake. I'm the teaching consultant for Mobile CSP. And just there outlined is some of the things I was mentioning. We're going to review the changes to the Explore performance task, in particular the rubric. That is what changed with the scoring guidelines for that, so we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about reviewing for the AP CSP exam. And then we're going to close out with some pacing guide concerns that have been mentioned to us by various teachers currently teaching the course. We'll give you some tips and tricks to try to get you on track if you're feeling concerned about that at all. And we'll have some pacing examples to go through and try to show you how you can get on track if you feel like you're a little bit off of your original plan. So again, Pauline Lake is who you're hearing. A little later on, we'll have a guest speaker, and I'll introduce him when we get a little bit closer. So before I continue on with this, I just want to remind everyone that the chat is there in the bottom right-hand side of the YouTube video. Cassandra Beckworth, our data specialist for Mobile CSP, is monitoring that, so she should be out there interacting with everyone. I did see her out there before we got started, so feel free to send your questions in and submit those as we're going. You don't have to wait till the end. You can submit them as we're going. We'll try to get as many questions answered as possible. So to go ahead and get started, we want to recap the changes that happened to the Explore performance task, and in particular, we're referring to the rubric. So we want to make sure that all of our teachers are definitely reviewing AP Central and the College Board's AP CSP exam page. So I did link here the link to the AP exam page, which hopefully many, if not all of you, should have seen. This opens up and it shows you actually that there is a webinar for tomorrow night. So we definitely encourage you to join that if you're teaching the course is AP this year. This webinar that they're going to offer tomorrow night is going to be about the AP digital portfolio and the updates for submitting your students' performance tasks to the portfolio. On this page, they also run through the due dates that are here, so you know that the performance tasks are due April 30th, and the exam will be Friday, May 5th at 12 noon. It's a 74-question, multiple choice, 2-hour-long written exam. This page also goes through and it has links to all the materials that they've provided so far directly from the College Board regarding anything related to submission of the performance tasks or grading of this performance tasks. It provides an overview of the exam and what to expect and how scoring will be calculated in the end. So definitely review this and make sure that you have explained this to your students if you are teaching the course as AP. So the scoring information here that I wanted to point out real quickly is the 2 performance tasks. You have the Explore, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, and the Create. The Explore task, as you know, is a written research paper about computing innovation that has an impact on society. It will make up about 16% of the overall AP score for the student, and it requires 8 hours of in-class time at minimum. The Create task is the programming task that accounts for 24% of the overall AP score, and it is required to have 12 hours minimum of class time for that. The end of course exam that I just mentioned briefly, the 74 questions, 2 hours, paper and pencil, multiple choice. It has single select and multiple select, and that accounts for 60% of the overall AP score. So this page has a lot of information. It's where the College Board has been trying to keep all of their updates posted there. And then I feel a little bit more importantly is at the end here, the scoring information. There is the Explore task and the Create task below it. They've released new samples with the new scoring guides and commentary for each. That's true for the Create task as well. If you have not reviewed these yet, I strongly recommend, and the team recommends, that you review these, especially when you're looking to grade your students' tasks for the purpose of the Mobile CSP research project. So I'm going to switch on back. So just to recap, the Explore performance task is about a computing innovation. There are written responses and an artifact that they have to complete, a computational artifact. This counts as 16% of the overall AP score. The task instructions have remained the same, and they have remained the same ever since fall of 2015. They've been pretty solid and consistent with what the task is. So on the Mobile CSP page and also in the course and exam description booklet, there's a link to the performance task instructions, which have the prompts 2A through 2E. So the student should still be answering those prompts 2A through 2E. What's changed, however, is how those prompts will be scored by the AP readers and by the teachers yourselves if you're doing the research project with Mobile CSP. So the new scoring guidelines that were released, it's more so a scoring guideline, not a rubric anymore. It was released in November of 2016. There are now 7 criteria. Each is worth 1 point, and they will either receive a 0 or a 1 for having that criteria or not. There is no in between. Before, it used to be high, medium, and low scores. It's now just 0 or 1. Each criteria is weighted differently. So if I go back to the the exam page, and I look under Explore for the scoring guidelines, I can open up the latest scoring guidelines they have linked here, which are also on the Mobile CSP page as well. And it outlines everything that was just mentioned, that there are 7 criteria. The possible score is either a 1 or a 0. And there are 7 things that the AP readers who are scoring the task, that they will be looking for. So the students, again, should still be answering the prompts 2A through 2E, which are in the task instructions and the submission requirements, which is in a separate document. And then they will then be scored on this set of criteria. So mobile CSP is asking you to look through these criteria if you are giving us research data and to score them accordingly. There's another spreadsheet that we provided, a presentation that has those weights. If you need access to that or you're not able to find that, let Cassie or myself know that you're having trouble finding that.
Pauline, I'm just going to jump in here really quick. We have a comment that the screen is a bit hard to read. Could you potentially zoom in, or is there any way to make that a little bit clearer?
Sorry, Cassie, you are breaking up.
We have a comment that the screen share is a little unclear. So could you potentially zoom in a bit?
Is it just for the scoring guidelines or for the presentation?
The comment says screen share.
Okay, so screen share, I'm in full screen share mode. So I'm just wondering, are they able to see the presentation, the slides okay, or is it just when I switch over to the AP site? Right now I'm in a PDF document that usually tends to be hard to read.
Okay, yeah, well then we have this linked in the agenda, so that might be a good place to go if you're having difficulty seeing it, but zooming in looks a little bit clearer there.
Okay. Thank you, Cassie. So yes, that tends to happen when we're viewing a PDF document. Again, I was just pointing out this is something that you should have seen, that you should have read. This is the scoring guidelines for the Explore task, and just reviewing that there are the 7 criteria that you have to look at. So the links provided on the slide should take you to where you need to go as far as getting access to the scoring guidelines themselves. I wanted to point out that there are some teaching tips that were put very subtly into the Explore 1 instructor materials. So I'm going to click on the instructor materials. As you know, we have a teacher branch with all of the teacher materials and lesson plans. And we also have the student side. And this signed me out. Tends to happen. So this is the teacher site. If I go to the Explorer 1 instructor materials, which I think the link did not take me there because I had logged out. You should see that it runs through the same stuff that you saw in the PD with mobile CSP. There's the professional development section that you should have seen when you were in the PD for the teachers who were with us last summer. We did link in here. There is the student lesson, so it takes you to the student side. The College Board's course and exam description with the specific pages for the reproducible student handout. That's where the prompts are for the Explore task and the instructions, the 2A through 2E. We've now linked in the College Board webinar where they explained the Explore rubric. There were 2 webinars they held. It was November 29th and December 8th. They held those directly with the teachers. There are sample projects that we wanted you to grade during the PD. So the new rubric is linked in there, and then it links to the exam page that I just brought up for you on the AP Central site. Those samples are now listed there. And then there were some others here that were for mobile CSP specific examples. Note that these did not follow the 2A through 2E prompts. These were done sooner, much earlier, I believe. So we're looking for new samples that we can put up here that would be mobile CSP specific. That's because this is for the Explorer 1, where we asked everyone to do the apps as the computing innovation, the phone monitoring software as the innovation. Just scrolling through this, I wanted to call attention to specifically this accordion that's here. I think this is a new feature that was added in over the summer, and I think that it may have been overlooked in some cases. Whenever you're on our lesson plans now, you can click these accordions for more information. Some open it up. Some have detailed information, some are still being worked on. As I mentioned, it's a new feature that we added. But the one I want to call your attention to, and just a quick glance, it looks like nothing's there, but if you click it, there is a list of teaching tips that were listed here. And I recently added on. So the College Board had a webinar with the curriculum developers before they met with the teachers last year. This was in November, right after the new scoring guidelines became available. And there were some notes that we took from that. And I decided to post some of them here because I felt that they were good tips for the teachers to consider when they were doing the Explore 1 task and preparing students to do Explore 2. So for those criteria, if you read through the 7 criteria, they are very similar. 3 and 4 are very similar. And teachers are noticing that. You're noticing and you're saying, what is the difference? How am I supposed to grade this? Well, grade each criteria individually. It's a 0 or a 1. They either have it or they don't. And the College Board even said, when focusing on criteria 4, that would be better for your students because then they would be able to get credit for 3 and 4. Okay, so if we were to look at these, I know it was a little blurry, so I'm kind of scared about showing this again, but 3 was to identify at least one effect of a computing innovation. So a student could say, an effect of the computing innovation is X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. Number 4, criteria 4, was to identify a beneficial and a harmful effect of the computing innovation and explain how one of the identified effects impacts or has potential to impact society, economy, or culture. So if a student answers 4 completely, accurately, concisely, they will be able to get credit for number 3. So if they focus on number 4, they'll be able to get credit for both of these. To that point, there was another comment, and I believe maybe I put this on the student side. I updated the student side as well, is that it's really a nice thing, a nice habit for the students to get into to restate the prompt or the question. So the prompts that are the 2A through 2E in the instructions, if they restate the prompt when they give their answer in their responses, they will likely be able to do well because they'll be directly answering what was in the prompt. And then when an AP reader comes and reads their responses to the prompts, and they look at this rubric or scoring guidelines, they'll be able to easily connect the two, right? Another important thing to remember is that when it comes for the AP reading, the readers will have a little bit more training and they'll be able to meet and they'll know what specifically they should be looking for. From mobile CSP standpoint, we're asking you just to give it your best try, right? When you're grading these for our research purposes, just give it your best interpretation, your best try. And again, it's either a 0 or a 1 for each of the 7 criteria. And again, there are some more tips here that came from the conversation with the College Board. I just want to point out a couple of them. Students should be making an acknowledgement for any images, music, videos that are used in their artifact or responses that is not theirs. So they should not use a source from somewhere else and not acknowledge it. They must, right? Otherwise, it will be plagiarism. So how do they acknowledge if they used a picture that was from another website, or if they use a song that was not theirs? How do they acknowledge that? Well, the simplest way is to do proper citations and to use something like MLA or APA style. Although those are not required by the College Board, they do want to see the proper citations, so there's a reference or a bibliography that's given. But they're not focused on the correctness and the preciseness of the citations, if that makes sense, right? So if you're in English or a literature class, you may have learned how to do MLA, have certain things in the right places, or technically it's not right. They're not looking that in depth, right? They're looking to make sure that some type of citation was provided, right? So if there's a period or a comma missing, it's okay. But they should definitely try to cite, and they should be citing any images, music, videos, resources, anything that is not theirs should be given proper acknowledgement, or it will be considered plagiarism. So there's some other tips there, and I encourage you to look at those and try to talk to your students about those when you're working on preparing for the Explore task. Another point here was that if you're teaching the AP course and you are going to have your students submit their tasks, you want them to use the template that's provided by the College Board on the AP digital portfolio. So your students should by now have signed up with their student account. You should have a teacher account, and they should see this template the College Board provided. That's to make sure that the students are answering and labeling correctly 2A through 2E. Those prompts should be answered and labeled. I think there was a misconception that students needed to label things 1 through 7, but that 1 through 7 is in regards to the scoring guidelines or the rubric. The students still need to answer and label the prompts 2A through 2E. Okay. And again, be sure to watch that recording that came from the College Board directly related to the changes that came. I think you'll see that you may have questions answered that you might be having, and you'll see that there's some good discussion that happened there. Cassie, are there any questions about that coming in?
No, we just have one question at this time asking about the number 3 instructions. The feed froze, but I think they can access that from the agenda. So at this time, we do not have any other questions coming in.
Yep. So the things I brought up are linked through the slides too. The slides are linked in the agenda, and the slides have most of the links that you need. And if anything's missing, you have trouble, just let us know and we'll get that to you. So I'm going to move on to talking a little bit about review and preparing for the AP CSP exam. So the AP CSP exam is May 5th, 2017. AP Central had announced, as you just saw, that it was at 12 noon on May 5th. So you should be planning accordingly and making sure your students are talking to your AP coordinator and getting signed up for the exam. I'm going to come back to that in a second. We wanted to mention just some resources as you're prepping for the exam. So Unit 8 has been updated a bit. Unit 8, I'm going to open this up.
Pauline, I'm just going to jump in really quick. We had a couple questions come in.
Okay.
So the first one states, is there a way to see if the students checked off that they were taking the AP exam? And that they stated the guidance people were asking about an AP student number. Is there a way for students to see that they were going to take the exam? And is there any way for them to access the student number?
So my understanding, like that would be very related to the audit process and the students signing up with their student account. Students should have their own account when they set up with the digital portfolio. If it's not there, I recommend that they whoever asked this question, they follow up with me, because I have been the acting liaison between mobile CSP and the College Board. So anytime that a specific question like that comes up, I can reach out and I can help get us answers. I have not had someone ask that specific question before, so I'm not sure with a specific answer at this moment. But to me, it does sound like it would be related to the AP audit process and the digital portfolio accounts that were set up.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question asking, was Practice Explore supposed to be only on parent monitoring apps?
That was our goal for the research participants this year. We wanted a baseline for that first performance task to really see how things were going with the preparation for the Explore and the grades that come through. It's really hard to compare scores for a task among students. If they're all on different topics, it can be difficult. So we wanted to have some baseline. If you did not do it on the apps, you know, it's not a huge problem. Just note that in your grade book that you used a different topic.
Great, thank you, Pauline. And we have some follow-up from the first question, stating that the students did check off that they were taking the exam, but they're not sure where to verify that information in the teacher portfolio.
In the digital portfolio?
Waiting for some feedback here. I would maybe suggest to Kristen here that to follow up with Pauline via email about this.
Which Kristen is that? No, yes, please reach out to me again as the acting liaison between mobile CSP and the College Board. There are specific questions that you have like that we need to get assistance with. We can do that. My shortcoming here is that I do not have a AP audit account or a student or teacher digital portfolio account, so I can't see. But we can definitely reach out to the College Board to make sure that we get help. The other thing that's been helpful too is the teachers who have gotten access and they have seen what the process is like, which I can't, as I mentioned. If they reach out and they kind of provide some help to these teachers that are asking and inquiring, we really appreciate that too.
Thank you, Pauline. I'm not seeing anything else coming in at this time.
All right. So Unit 8 for the AP CSP exam, we did update it a bit, so I'm just going to open up Unit 8 here. So Unit 8 originally had, this is the student side, Unit 8 originally had an overview that explained, the task and the exam. We then had a little lesson here or a placeholder that told a little bit about the AP exam so students could kind of get familiar with it. Most of the stuff is what you see on AP Central on the exam page. 8.3 had sample questions, so students should be trying these sample questions as they go. It's loading up here. These sample questions were from the course and exam description booklets that had been released by the College Board over the last couple of years. So I'm going to scroll down very quickly. There are 30 questions listed here. Many of them are listed and incorporated into the lessons throughout the mobile CSP course. So you and your student should be seeing an AP CSP sample exam question at the bottom of some of the lessons you've been doing. All of those are put here into this one section at the end that students can go and they can practice. Again, these are from the course and exam description booklet, so as an instructor who has access to that booklet, some of you and most of you should have the booklet, a hard copy of it. I said to my Connecticut teachers that it was going to be your best friend. I really mean that. Keep it close. Use it, as a guide as questions come up for various things, but the sample exam questions are inside there as well, with a little bit more explanation from a teacher point of view about why these answers are correct. So you can have the students go back and try answering some of these. So these were here already and they were incorporated throughout the course. But we want to call your attention to a couple of new things that are just added in. So 8.4 now is the new mobile CSP Principals Quiz app, which an email did go out including this announcement. So Professor Morelli, our fearless leader of mobile CSP, and Beryl Hoffman from Massachusetts worked on this amazing app to help students study. So the app is, it can be used on this page. It's embedded down below. They can also use it in the browser as a web app, or they can use it on their Android phone and take it with them where they go. So these questions that have been incorporated, you know, they get feedback, and it's a fun little way to be practicing, and hopefully the students will practice, you know, if they're on the bus or you know they're at home, they can practice and hopefully feel a little bit more prepared for the exam when it comes. If you have feedback or suggestions about the quiz app, or your students, if they have feedback, feel free to send it to us, info@mobile-csp.org. There's also a form here linked right above the quiz that you can give feedback as well. So that is there as a nice little neat little resource for your students to try out. And then 8.5 is just a couple of additional resources. So this is the student side, so it mentions albert.io for additional CSP practice questions. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go to it, just know that's there. Check it out with your students. And then some teachers have already gotten their hands on this, but there's a book called Fast Track to 5, Preparing for the AP Computer Science Principals Exam. The book is about $20, and it has sample questions relating to each of the 7 big ideas, as well as 2 full 74-question practice exams. I received a copy last week, and I know other teachers who are with us have a copy of this, and they reported good feedback as well. So definitely recommend it as a resource. The teachers, as an AP teacher who completed the audit process, you also had access to the practice exam that came from the College Board themselves. So hopefully you were able to access that when it was available. So those new resources are there in Unit 8, just calling attention to those, as well as the mobile CSP final exam could be given as a review for the AP CSP exam. Recommended taking it May 1st, perhaps, right after the performance tasks are due, maybe May 1st or 2nd, depending on the AP schedule for your students. Many of you might have students who are doing other AP courses, and you have to work around that schedule. But we do recommend giving our CSP, mobile CSP final exam the first week of May as a review. And it's also suggested that you complete the post survey if you're giving us data and research this academic year, to give us the post survey and have the students give the post survey at the same time. Even though it's not completely the end of the year, they have been through the majority of the curriculum already, and that's what we're looking for feedback on. Cassie, are there any questions about Unit 8 or review for the exam?
I'm not seeing at this time. Maybe we should just give it a couple seconds with the lag.
Sure.
So if you have any questions at this time you'd like us to address, go ahead and type those in the live chat. I'm not seeing anything come in, Pauline, but I'll interject if anyone's typing anything up.
Sounds good. Thank you, Cassie. So in regards to submitting performance tasks and scores, AP students should be submitting their performance tasks to the AP digital portfolio. Again, there's a reminder about the webinar tomorrow night with the College Board on the updates regarding that digital portfolio. The tasks are due on the digital portfolio by April 30th. And then we wanted to point out again that if a student uploads a task to their AP digital portfolio, the College Board then assumes that they will be taking the AP CSP exam in May, right? Because the performance tasks are part of the overall AP score. Why would they be submitting it to the College Board for grading if they weren't going to take the bulk of the AP score? 60% is the AP exam on May 5th. So if they upload a task to the digital portfolio, they assume they're going to take the exam in May, and an exam is ordered for them, and the exam fee is charged. So for this, we recommend talking to your AP coordinator about the fee reductions that are available by district and state. And there's a link there, right? So if you have the slides, you can go and check out a little bit more information about the exam fee and possible fee reductions available. If a student does not plan to take the AP CSP exam in May, they should not upload their performance tasks to the digital portfolio. And I noticed a typo, so I'm going to fix it right now if I can. They should not upload their tasks to the digital portfolio. They can turn them into you, the instructor, but they would not be submitting them to the portfolio. Non-AP students as well, those students should be submit their tasks directly to their instructor. They do not need to go set up a AP digital portfolio with the College Board. And then as far as grading the tasks, if you are submitting data to Mobile CSP, that there's roughly a date of June 1st, but just to say to coordinate directly with Cassandra and myself to make sure that you, with a hybrid or online, have the exact date and you know when to be submitting. If you're an AP instructor in particular, we expect that you could have all of your grades in by June 1st because the tasks are due April 30th and the exam you would give the first week of May. June 1st would give you a whole month to complete the grading and get your grade book finalized. If you're a non-AP teacher, there would be some flexibility there, but again, coordinate with Cassandra and myself to make sure that you are on track and have everything that you need to submit the data in June. Good there. So again, if you have questions about this, let us know. This is more just FYI, some teachers had asked about it. So the very last part, we have about 20 minutes to do this, and I would say it is one of the biggest things that we're probably going to talk about tonight is the pacing. So I'm going to call out very quickly to our guest speaker who should be here. Tony, are you out there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second and just welcome Tony. So Tony Quattrochi is at Robert E. Fitch High School in Groton, Connecticut. He is actually one of my mentees this semester. I'm actually a master teacher this year as well. And he's currently teaching the course, and we just recently had a nice little chat and meeting addressing his concerns. So Tony is going to be jumping in, kind of having a little bit of dialogue with me about pacing as he went through having a little bit of concern and maybe even anxiety over making sure that he was on track to complete everything in time for the April 30th deadline. So the next portion is going to be about pacing and scheduling, making sure that you're on track, and it's geared more towards the AP teachers who have that deadline of April 30th. Tony, do you have anything you want to add before I jump into the slides?
Well, the only thing I would add is that my school's on an AB schedule, so I only see my AP students every other day, and we have generally we are in 80-minute periods with small exceptions here and there. So some weeks I see my kids 3 times, some weeks I see them 2. So I think the AB schedule is kind of a disadvantage, and I'm going to be talking to my administrators about is there a way around that for next year.
I think that brings up a bigger thing, which is as we're preparing for next year, right? We know our application is out and available for the summer PD for 2017. Little plug there. We have teachers who are coming to us to sign up for next academic year and saying, can this be taught in a semester format, or what format can you do? We definitely recommend full year, and if you can, to try to meet every day. I know some of you don't have control over that. It's up to your schools. But the ideal situation is meeting every day for X amount of time for the entire full year. That's the ideal. And we'll talk about a little bit, Tony and I, about what could happen when you're not on that schedule, which is what he's experiencing, and how to handle that a little bit. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to share my screen again. So the first piece of advice would be to see if you're on track, would be to check out Teach 1.12. Teach 1.12. So way back in Unit 1 of the instructor materials, if you were in the PD this summer, you completed this during week 1 of the PD. It talked about the syllabus and the curriculum overview. And then another thing that we worked on was giving a sample course schedule for a full year course that outlined the unit, an estimated start date for that unit, depending on when you actually started your school year. This was based off of starting at the end of August. And then the estimated amount of time based on 45-minute class periods. Some of you have like 42, 43, some of you have 80 or 90. So it's roughly around that time. You'll see that the lessons throughout the course are done in either 45-minute or 90-minute estimates, or I think the other one is like 135 if it's a blown to bits lesson. So this is a good place just to roughly check and see if you're in the right spot. We are mid-February right now, and the estimated start time here for Unit 6 would be mid-February. So if you have not started Unit 6 yet, that would be a sign that maybe you need to start thinking a little bit more about how are you going to plan out the rest of the time that you have if you're an AP instructor. Remember, this is geared towards if you're AP and you have your students doing the performance task for April 30th and the exam on May 5th. This would be for your schedule as an estimate that you would somehow around this time be somewhere around Unit 6. So this is a good starting point to make sure you're kind of on track for the semester. And I just realized, I hope that was clear enough because it might have been really tiny. So I'm going to zoom in, Teach 1.12, take a look at the schedule, make sure you're roughly at that point. And then if you realize that you're not and you're an AP instructor, the next several slides are for you. And I just want to point out the research participants. There's a pacing guide either from Cassie or myself that you can access to help you make sure that you're on track as far as submitting data to us. Make sure that you're reviewing that pacing guide and that you are staying on track with the research requirements so that way you are on track to receive your stipend at the end of the year. And again, check with Cassie or myself if you have concerns about that or submitting items to your grade book. So if you are looking at that Teach 1.12 schedule and you said to yourself, oh no, I'm running out of time, what do I do? Or, oh no, I'm not at that point, what can I do to get caught up? We have some pacing tips here that Tony and I are going to talk about in the next few minutes, and how we addressed his concerns. So this is just a quick overview, and then you're going to hear us talk about these things and work them out as we go. So as we're talking, think about comparing your schedule or your plan for classes to the schedule that was in Teach 1.12 as just mentioned. If you're an AP instructor, your target date is April 30th because the performance tasks are due April 30th. Work backwards from there. You know that mandatory is a 12 hours in class for the create task and an 8 hours minimum is mandatory in class for the explore task. So if you have not done those yet, you definitely need to work back from April 30th, take into account those 20 hours of in-class time, and then see what you have left as a remainder of time. Then you're going to want to pick out the top priority lessons. We're going to do that in just a moment as an example, just to show you what it could be like. What's essential to cover for the exam, what you want to think about. All of these principal topics and the learning objectives have to be covered for the AP exam. And not just programming. There are other topics, there are other big ideas, right? 7 big ideas that you have to cover, and make sure the students are well-rounded in each of those big ideas so they'll be ready for the AP CSP exam. And of course, they can try the sample questions to kind of gauge where they're at as well. We're going to recommend just a moment that you skip lessons marked as optional. If you're really in a bind for time, you want to skip those lessons. And you can, if you're AP, you can come back to them after the AP exam. You have from May to June to cover those lessons and go back. Combine lessons when necessary. We're going to show you that in just a second. Keep that in mind. And assign homework as needed, as necessary. For example, non-programming language assignments such as 6.4. We're going to talk about 6.4 is a big data lesson with videos. Students, you could assign them to watch those videos at home and look at the topics that are there, and then come into class ready to discuss what they have seen in the videos. We're going to get into that. So keep these tips in mind. We're going to come back to them. All right, Tony, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still
awesome.
here.
So next up is Tony's schedule. So Tony, do you want to explain a little bit about, I have your February, your March, and your April. Do you want to give some context to this?
About the end of January is where I went into full panic when I started counting days until April 30th. And I started counting classes, and I recognized that starting the 1st of February, I only had 29 classes to fit in all of Create 2, Explore 2, and all of Units 6 and 7, and to get the kids ready for the test. So what I did is I just took a standard calendar and started filling in the days I had class and the days that we were off, because my school has a little break over the President's Day weekend coming up. We have 2 days off. And then we also have our spring break, the 10th to the 14th of April. And then we also have a complete loss of a day due to a teacher professional development. So those were all, and I lost another day because of the April 5th SAT test that is being given across the state to all the juniors and seniors. So when I started looking at all those dates, I completely panicked. I threw this together. I emailed it to Pauline and said, help, how can I get it all done so my kids are ready? So when I started backing off the number of hours and classes to fill the 12-hour Explore or 12-hour Create 2 requirement, that took 9 classes. So that kind of wiped out all of April as far as classwork goes. And then when I threw in the 8 classes required, or the 6 classes required to do the Explore 2, that's, it takes me to a total of 15 classes that I had to completely have free and clear for the kids to work. That took me to the 8th of March is when I have to start Explore 2 with my students. So I have to get all of the classwork done by then. So that's what put me in a complete panic. So
So if we take a look at March, I was kind of going backwards with the slides as you were talking. Going into March here, you have 3 days in March, and if we back up to February, you have 7, 8, 9 classes listed there. Yep, so 9 classes in February and 3 in March. So you had 12 classes after figuring in what was actually going to be the minimum of in-class time for the official tasks, right? So obviously, a huge reason, an absolute good reason to go into panic mode about how are you going to get this done, and for everybody else to have a little bit of context. So as of February 1st, you were on lesson 5.3, right? Around
Yes.
that. And from there, you had about 29 classes. By the time you backed it up, that was reduced to 12 because of all that minimum time that was required for the task. So you had 12 classes that you could use for teaching units 6 and 7, basically, right?
That's correct.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So keep in mind, he worked backwards again from April 30th, marking off here what was the absolute days that had to be used, the minimum amount of time for the create. Went backwards again with the explore, and then he figured out how many days he had left, which was 12. 12 days classes to teach units, basically 6 and 7. So we want to talk briefly about how we figured out unit 6, right? So we put up the lessons here. Some of them are missing just because of the size of the slide. We didn't want to make things too small. So I told Tony, I told you that you should try to maximize the amount of time you had in class. You have 80-minute classes. Our lessons are generally 45 minutes each, and that you should try to do 2 lessons in 1 class because you had longer class periods, right? If you're meeting every day and it's 45 minutes or 42 minutes, you can do 1 lesson per day, yes. But in Tony's case, he had enough time for 2 lessons or so. So I suggested to you, Tony, that you take the tutorials and you have students prepare outside of class. So that idea of the flipped classroom. To do those lessons outside of class, so 6.2, for example, assign it as a homework assignment and tell them to come in ready to talk about 6.3. Those lessons were particularly important because they were about parallel list. Now, for reference for the other teachers, you were able to do something like that because you have students that have access to technology, correct?
That's right. Almost every, the school has issued Chromebooks to all the underclassmen, and most of the seniors have purchased their own laptops or they have desktops at home. So no student has told me, well, I don't have access at home. So.
Right. So in some cases, you may be at a school, there might be teachers out there that don't have students that have access to the technology at home. That makes it difficult to do the programming outside of class. But that would be an example of non-programming. So the next lesson that was here was big data. Big data, again, we mentioned, had videos that they could watch outside of class. That they could watch those on their phones, or they could, maybe spend some time in the library or after school, somehow giving them access to those videos that they could watch, but not necessarily requiring that they have a computer or a device that they could use to test an app, right? Because it's a non-programming lesson. The other ones here are 6.5, 6.6, and 6.9. So 6.5, abstracting data to the web, and 6.6. So 6.5, I had suggested to Tony that he focused on the database concepts video in that lesson. I think that concept video is really, very important for the students to get the concept that's there, and to really conceptualize what data is and how it's stored on the web versus on the device. That being said, it wasn't it isn't necessarily a requirement that they use Firebase in an app, right? But you can let the students know that if they want to put Firebase in their Create 2 programming project, that the tutorial is there, that they could use it. And of course, they'd have to reference it as they used it as a guide, or to help them implement it in their app if needed. List of lists, Tony, I told you to focus on that one, right?
Yes.
Right. Because students should have an idea of more complex programming. So having list of lists, make sure that they understand a deeper level of programming, rather than, they click a button and it selects a list item. That's important to know, but there should be a deeper understanding of lists that work together and how they're doing that. So they're still getting programming experience with that lesson, but they're also getting bigger ideas that are there as well. And then I put 6.9 up here because, why, Tony? You know?
Well, because it's using the web, and now I'm drawing a blank.
Did I tell you to do it?
What's that?
Did I tell you to do it?
No, you said it was optional. So.
Exactly, right? So it's marked as optional. So it's just one of those to remind you that it's optional. You can save it for after the AP exam, and you didn't have to use one of your essential class times to cover it.
Now, let me add one thing. That list of lists, I actually had 3 students when they did their Create 1, decide that they needed to figure out how to do that, and they did it on their own. So I know that ability exists in the classroom. So
right. So that actually takes me to Unit 7. So we're at the end here. We're wrapping up. We got to talking about Unit 7. Unit 7's a little bit harder to work with and combine things and take things out, because there's lots in here about the internet that students need to know about the concepts because of the AP CSP exam. So I told Tony, I told you to take out 7.3 and instead focus on 7.5, right? Because 7.5 had texting, it had lists, it had loops, it combined some of these topics, especially the loops, right? It was going to be really great if the students can put loops into their final projects if they can. But to eliminate 7.3, to what Tony's point was a moment ago, that students sometimes figure things out for their Create 1. Texting is one of those ones that I personally, in the classroom when I visit teachers, have seen students figure this out for their Create 1 project. Again, the tutorial is there if they want to learn how to incorporate texting, they can, but it's not required to do well on the Create task, right? And then, Tony, do you want to talk about how we decided to do the lessons on internet and security?
Well, those really, they're going to do them at home pretty much, I think. They're going to be looking at those online, if I remember what our discussion was. Mm-hmm. So.
Yep, so 7.2, I think, is another one that's like 6.4. It's a lot of terms and terminology. They can view the videos at home and then come in and ask questions. Or as a teacher, you can give them a handout that they can review at home, or an activity, maybe a matching activity with terminology, a worksheet that they can do at home, and then they come in and talk about it. 7.6 and 7.7 are very important because the security topics are related to the questions on the AP CSP exam. So if you can, try to talk about those in class to some extent, right? You definitely want to try to cover those. So Unit 7 is a little bit harder to trim down on. I think there's more flexibility with Unit 6, and there's a lot of flexibility with the programming. So we are a programming-centric curriculum, but we also have to remember, when it comes to be crunch time, that the students need to have practice with the other concepts, and we have to kind of trim back. They may not like it, but we have to trim back in some cases on the programming if we're going to meet these timelines and the deadlines that we have. Again, keeping in mind that programming that you pull out, you could do after the AP CSP exam. Tony, is there anything that you'd like to add, or can I ask you, if you had to do this again, what would you do differently?
What I would have done is at the beginning of the year, I would have laid the calendar out. I didn't do that until I felt I was in trouble. I really should have done that on day one so that I would have picked up the pace earlier. I kind of went a little bit slower at the beginning because, one, the kids were just getting used to it, but I should have been going faster. So I guess I'd recommend for next year that everybody lay out their schedule well in advance and then stay ahead of that schedule and give yourself some time. Because the other thing that I'm definitely worried about right now is if we have any more snow days on the days I'm supposed to have class with my guys, because I don't get those back. So.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely tough, and I know that there are others who are definitely feeling the same concerns that Tony was feeling. If there are specific questions that you have, if you've tried these, and I just want to go back here to the slide, if I can, that these are the things that we were just talking about and implementing, again, these tips on how to map out that time, plan that time that you have left. So try to do that as soon as possible. And if when you have done that, you've mapped it out as Tony and I have done together, your master teacher or your mentor, and reach out to them, right? They've taught the course before in most cases, or nearly all, and they have experience to know what might be good and to kind of get you on track. And then, as always, if you have trouble after doing all of that and exhausting all those options, I'm always here to help out if you have questions. My title is teaching consultant, so I'm always here for you. And I've worked with the teachers over the past few years to build up the curriculum and the pacing that we have. And I think another thing to keep in mind is, this is the first year that we've done it, and we're doing it together as far as it being an official AP course. And every bit of feedback that you're giving to us, so that way we can implement it in the new year, right, in the coming year, and we can make this better moving forward. But with that being said, we definitely want to make sure that you are on track for your students to do well and for you to feel confident. So try this planning, reach out if you have questions. So at this time, Cassie, are there any questions or concerns that are out there?
We have one question. Is blown to bits important for tests, or can these lessons be postponed?
Great question. So it was in my notes, and I was waiting for someone to say it. I kept it out of that Tony and I were talking about, right? It's a good supplemental book for reading, and it brings together a lot of the topics that we did, but it's not required. I think it can help you, though. So we were talking just now, Tony and I were talking about Unit 7 and how cryptography, 7.6, 7.7, those are getting tight for him, and he's worried about snow days. There's a chapter, and it's the end of Unit 7, I think it's 7.8, that's about cryptography, that brings together these topics that were in these lessons. And if you assign that as a reading, for homework that's on a snow day, right, they're still going to start picking up and thinking about the topics that would be in these lessons that you would deliver in the classroom. So it can be used supplementally to add on, and it can be also used kind of as a lifeline too if you're running out of time and you need to deliver a lesson, but you have limited technology or limited resources. But it's not required. I think, to do well on the AP CSP exam, I think if students just did the lessons throughout the course, they would do fine. That's not to say that they shouldn't be doing blown to bits at all. I obviously think that it's a valuable thing, but in order to prepare, I don't think that they necessarily need it. You could do current events with your students, for example, talking about things that have happened in the news recently, just so they can start making those connections to the world around them. But I don't think that it's do well. was a great question.
That article I sent you out of the New York Times,
Mm-hmm.
this past Sunday, the New York Times again put up an article on their front page about more of that kind of shenanigans happening in Mexico with a different company, but it did mention the hacking team again. So,
yeah, that's something that some of the teachers adopted year round to look at current events. Go ahead, Cassie.
Thank you. We also have another question just to clarify. Is Tony skipping lessons 6.7 and 6.8?
So I didn't put them on the slides for the sake of the space that was there. 6.7 is about the data visualization and making sure they have an understanding of using spreadsheets. So that's one that you could combine with 6.4. So if students do homework outside of class, that could be 6.4. They watch the videos, they learn a little bit about big data. Then you could do an activity in class based off of that lesson that is about them using a spreadsheet or taking a fusion table and working with that. The idea there is that they understand how to manipulate the data and use a computational tool like a spreadsheet to help them. So you could do a lesson with them that or an activity with them that helps them see that point. But the other one that goes with it is an actual project. I think that's 6.8. It's a project that's a full-length project. That's really, if you have the time, it's nice to do if you had planned for it. Quick note for those who are newer to CSP, that there used to be a data project as a performance task, and they took it out. But mobile CSP still thought it was valuable, especially if you had the time to do that data project with students. Let them work with a partner, work collaboratively, find a data set, ask questions about it. So for the AP CSP exam, they should understand how to look at data, how to look at a table, how to answer questions. They should understand, if they had a data set that had certain pieces of information, what could be answered from that. So that I'm thinking of these questions because of the sample questions that are there, where they show tables and they ask you to give some result of what would come out of that table or what would happen. I think doing a nice little activity with fusion tables from 6.7 would be enough, and maybe assigning a homework assignment. But I don't think that doing that full project is necessary for them to get the point of spreadsheets being important, and whether it's Excel or Google spreadsheets or data manipulation, right? The big data. That could be one that's nice to leave till after the exam as well.
Thank you, Pauline. A question here too. If kids finish Explore Part 2 on March 10th in class, do they upload that right away or do they wait?
They can upload it as soon as it's ready. It's really up to them. It might be easier for you as a teacher. Remember, you're not supposed to give them feedback until it's submitted. So if they want feedback, you're not supposed to grade it until it's submitted, right? So if you're submitting grades to us for the research data, you want them to submit it so you can grade it. I think that's another thing that as instructors you have to also think about yourselves when it comes to submitting for the research project. You're going to have to grade the task. Do you want to wait until April 30th or May 1st to grade all of those at once, or do you want to start with one a little bit sooner? I think personally, once it's submitted, it's a huge weight off of everybody's shoulders. Like, the students know that it's submitted, they know that it's done with. You help them by giving them an earlier deadline to get it done. So again, I would submit it as soon as the time is up that you give for the in-class time, to make sure everybody submits at the same time. But it's not, they could technically wait until the April 30th. Just remember that as a teacher, you should not be getting feedback until they've submitted it.
Great, thank you, Pauline. I think maybe just we'll do another call here for questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and type those in the chat. I'm not seeing anything coming in here, Pauline. I don't know if you want to give it a couple more seconds or if you want to.
Sure. So as we're waiting a bit, the next webinar is going to be March 14th. We will have Thunkable with us. Some of you know that Mobile CSP has been looking into a partnership with Thunkable, which has App Inventor, and they've taken it and they've kind of vamped it up a bit. And there's going to be the possibility soon for iOS apps, right? So we are looking into partnering with them. So we're going to have the creators on the webinar with us, as well as a guest speaker who is a current teacher that has been testing it out for us. And so it's going. So we're excited to share that with you. So join us on March 14th, Easter.
Okay, I see we're a couple minutes over the time for the webinar. I'm not seeing any other final questions come in. So thank you from Pauline and Tony for joining us and taking the lead on this. We really appreciate your guys' time.
Absolutely. If you have questions, shoot me an email. Let me know if you need help with the pacing. Talk to your master teachers as well. 8, and just make sure you really do start taking a look at how much time you have left, so there are no surprises. Right. So thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. We hope to see you next month for the Thunkable webinar. And thank you again, Tony, for joining us. Much appreciated. Thanks, Cassie, for handling the chat.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.